I hurried home from work. It was already dark and frosty, December, after all. Since I worked in one city and lived in another, I had to commute by train. In the morning, to work, in the evening, home. The journey took just under an hour. Today was Friday, and my mood was uplifted. As I stepped onto the deserted platform, I began waiting for the train. The platform was empty. It was located on the outskirts, near an industrial zone, and there were usually few people here, but today it was completely deserted. I took out my phone and started browsing the internet. The train quietly approached, and I was pleasantly surprised that it arrived 5 minutes early, something that didn't happen often. This fact only added to my good mood, and I literally jumped through its open doors. I was eager to warm up in the cozy train car, as it was about -25 degrees outside. Entering the warm car, I immediately felt my mood improved by another 10 points. Moreover, the car was completely empty. I could sit wherever I wanted. Perfect. Soon I'd be home, and ahead of me were 2 days off with plenty of plans. As soon as I got comfortable, the train started moving and picked up speed. I was about to check my phone, but no luck, all connection to the outside world had suddenly disappeared. I didn't expect such treachery from my trusty Samsung, with its 2 SIM cards both offline. I restarted the phone, same story. Oh well, this minor inconvenience couldn't ruin my mood. I took out my headphones, turned on an audiobook, and leaned back in my seat, waiting for the conductor. The monotonous voice droned in my headphones, and I fell asleep. When I woke up, a thought flashed through my mind. Had I missed my stop? My heart started racing, and I immediately checked the time. I'd been riding for about an hour. My stop should be coming up, but the train was still speeding along, not slowing down. Outside the windows was night, the moon, and a forest. An endless forest on both sides. The car was still empty. I started feeling uneasy. I looked at the electronic display with the scrolling text, but it was blank. I checked my phone again, still no signal. I thought maybe I'll walk through the cars and ask people what the last stop was. I stuffed my phone and headphones into my pocket and headed to the next car, empty. I kept going. I passed about 5 dimly lit cars, not a soul in sight. My gaze fell on the emergency communication button. I approached it and pressed it. A wild screech and hiss blasted from the speakers, startling me so much that I jumped back. My thoughts were racing, and I didn't know what to do. I looked at the emergency brake. It was broken. My right hand reached up to scratch the back of my head, and then I remembered I had a hat. I'd left it on the seat in the car where I'd boarded at the station. I hurried back to get it. Along the way, I noticed that all the emergency brakes were broken. This only increased my anxiety. But if I had known what awaited me on the way back to my car, I would never have gone. But I didn't know. Anyway, I made it through 3 cars toward the rear, entered the next one, and from the opposite end, it entered. When I saw it, I froze in the doorway. I broke out in a sweat, and my legs nearly gave out. A hoarse sound escaped my throat. It was enormous in height and width, slowly approaching me on massive bare feet. The shape of its feet was human-like, but the size. Each foot was the size of a child's sled. The car was lit by a single dusty light, which, like the moon, illuminated the surreal scene that felt like a nightmare. The creature's huge hands, with palms like excavator buckets, reached down to the floor. Its fingers were as thick as my arm, and it had to hunch over to fit within the height of the car. A massive belly hung over its pants. This mutant was dressed in a conductor's uniform, also oversized, but straining at the seams from its bulging body. The uniform was dirty and torn. A large, battered leather conductor's bag hung from a strap over its shoulder. But the most terrifying part was what sat on its shoulders, a huge, bald head covered in scars, with no eyeballs and eyelids sewn shut with mattress stitching. Its mouth was so large that a medium-sized watermelon could fit inside. The monster slowly moved forward, feeling each seat with its massive hands. It meticulously checked every inch of the car. It felt under the seats themselves, and even the luggage racks. All the while, It muttered something incomprehensible, snorting, grunting, and wheezing. Occasionally, I could make out growling words. "Show your ticket," followed by HRRRAAA, YYYY, ticket AAA, show. Then the car shook, and my paralysis broke. I quickly turned around and bolted. I ran through about 10 cars, maybe even 15, until I saw the figure of a sitting person to my right. My brain didn't immediately process this information, and my legs, driven by fear, didn't obey the command to stop, so I raced past to the vestibule. There, with an effort of will, I managed to stop. I turned around and looked at the man. He was dozing by the window, roughly in the middle of the car. I rushed over to wake him. When I grabbed his shoulder, he woke up. "Run! There's a mutant back there!" I shouted anxiously. "Ah, so you've met the conductor." The passenger smirked bitterly. I was taken aback by his calmness. I opened my mouth to say something, but all the words in my head got tangled. "Don't worry, sit down, I'll explain everything," the stranger offered. His calm tone had an effect on me. My legs, feeling like jelly, gave way, and I sat down across from him. He continued, "There are about 10 to 12 cars between us and the conductor. As you've probably noticed, the conductor is blind and moves very slowly. It takes him about 20 minutes to feel through an entire car, the vestibule, and squeeze into the next one. So, he'll reach our car in about 3 hours. That gives me time to explain what's going on here." "What's going on?" I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. "My name is Georgy Alexandrovich, but you can call me Uncle Zora. I'm a passenger of the ghost train, and now you are too." I caught my breath and took a closer look at my companion. He was about twice my age, around 60, with an intellectual appearance, a small graying beard, a slightly crumpled dark hat, and a dark coat that also looked a bit wrinkled. "Why did you call it a ghost train, and when will my stop come?" I continued, choosing the most pressing questions from the swarm in my head. "Your stop won't come. This train exists in a different dimension relative to our world," Uncle Zora said sympathetically and continued. "It's hard for you to understand all this now, but I'll try to explain. The situation is this: we've entered a parallel dimension. This train sometimes stops at stations and picks up passengers. And it only takes one passenger at a time from our world into this parallel one. There's no way back." "What do you mean?" I asked skeptically. "Look out the window." "What do you see?" he said. "It's dark," I replied. "Exactly," my companion confirmed. "In this world, it's always night. The train rushes through an endless winter taiga. On both sides, trees. An endless ocean of conifers. And frost. I've been riding for over a month now. Although, the concept of time here is very relative. And nothing changes outside the window. Only occasionally are there stations. Abandoned, deserted, in the middle of the endless taiga. And after the train stops at one, a new passenger boards. At the last station you got on. Why didn't you get off the train then?" I asked. "Those who get off remain at the abandoned station in the frosty taiga of this strange world. They either freeze to death or—" Here my companion paused. "Or what?" I whispered. "You've seen the conductor, right?" he asked. "Now imagine what kind of monsters roam this taiga. This train is like a one-way valve, it lets people from our world into its own, but as for how to get back, I don't know." All of this sounded like some kind of nonsense, or a cruel joke. I had boarded the train this evening to get home, and now I was stuck in some incomprehensible place. No connection. No way out. But there had to be some way. "Listen, if we walk forward through the cars, we could reach the locomotive, and there are drivers there," I began to reason. "It's futile," my companion interrupted. "First, I can't even imagine what the drivers look like here, and second, the train is endless, or rather, it has no beginning." "How is that possible?" I asked, bewildered. "Don't forget, my friend, we're in a different world. The laws of our world don't apply here. I've been moving forward through the cars for over a month. The conductor keeps pushing us. In short, the train has no beginning, and it ends right behind the conductor. When he passes through a car, it simply disappears, as if dissolving into thin air. Who is this conductor? I asked. One of the natives of this world, he explained. This world is inhabited by mutants, each designed for a specific task. Besides the conductor, there are road workers, ticket clerks at station booths, and even law enforcement. They're all extremely aggressive, and to them, we're just food. I saw the conductor eat Herman. He grabbed him with his massive hand like a pastry, bit off his head first, and then devoured the rest of him without a trace. Even now, when I remember it, my legs go weak. Who's Herman? I exhaled. Herman became a passenger a few days after me. Uncle Zora began. I measure days by my wristwatch since there's no sun here. Then Herman came up with a theory that you could leave the train if you got behind the conductor. So, he decided to hide under a seat, hoping the conductor, being blind, wouldn't find him. But the conductor did. I tried to talk him out of it. Uncle Zora lamented. But he wouldn't listen. I stood in the vestibule and watched. And when the conductor grabbed him, then the sound of his skull cracking. It was a gruesome sight. After what I saw, I must have run through 20 cars before I could calm down. Even now, it gives me chills. Uncle Zora fell silent, and I didn't know what to say either. I was trying to piece together some coherent picture of what was happening to me. But it wasn't easy. My brain couldn't grasp the concept of a train with no beginning, couldn't understand how I'd entered another world, or what to do about it all. Are you hungry? Uncle Zora asked in a fatherly tone. His question pulled me out of the chaos of my thoughts, and I realized I was starving. A little, I admitted, embarrassed. Uncle Zora pulled a sports bag from under the seat and began unpacking bundles. Here's some chicken in foil, bread, tomatoes, a cucumber, and a bottle of soda, he listed. Where did you get the food? I asked in surprise. You've been here so long. That's another oddity of this train, he explained, unwrapping the chicken. As we move through the cars, we sometimes find bags with food and water in them. They look like they were left behind by passengers who got off at their stations. But we don't know where they really come from. It's as if someone doesn't want us to starve to death here. Are there other passengers besides us? I asked, chewing on the chicken. Yes, Lyoka and Sergei. But they've gone far ahead. Lyoka once found a note saying there's a portal on the train that can take you back to our world. An unknown passenger explained in the note that this portal is constantly moving forward through the cars, somehow synchronized with the conductor, and is always 1,000 cars ahead of him. So, they went looking for it. They think they'll find a way out, Uncle Zora said, slicing tomatoes and bread. But I don't think there's any portal, so I'm in no hurry. A huge moon hung in the sky outside the windows, casting a pale, ashen light over the endless taiga. The wheels, like the hooves of some mythical horse, rhythmically clattered along the tracks. 2 men sat in the dim light, eating chicken in an empty car of a strange, endless train hurtling through the vastness of an incomprehensible world. It's hard to imagine a more mystical scene, I thought, crunching on a cucumber. We should get moving, Uncle Zora said, glancing at his watch. The conductor will be here soon. By the way, you haven't introduced yourself, young man. What's your name? He continued. Valera. And you can use you with me, I replied. Nice to meet you, he croaked, standing up. Come on, Valera, let's get out of here before the conductor arrives. Uncle Zora grabbed his bag, and we started moving through the empty cars, putting as much distance between us and the conductor as possible. Count the cars as we pass them, and I'll count too. We'll compare later, he said to me. And I started counting on my fingers as we passed each car. We passed 7 cars, and at the door of the 8th, Uncle Zora suddenly stopped and raised his hand. I understood the gesture and froze too. A second later, he pointed into the dimly lit space of the car ahead of us. I squinted and saw a man lying on the floor. He was lying between the rows of seats, feet toward us, and in his right hand, he clutched something white. The man wasn't moving, only swaying slightly with the motion of the train. From time to time, Uncle Zora began to whisper, "The train presents its passengers with a car that has a surprise. The surprises vary, but they're usually deadly dangerous. It's as if some evil experimenter is conducting dangerous tests on us. In these moments, you have to be extremely careful." "What should we do?" I whispered. "You stay here, and I'll take a look," Uncle Zora quietly commanded. He set his bag down on the floor, slowly slid the car doors open just enough to squeeze through sideways, and crept toward the figure on the floor. I stayed behind, ready to help at any moment, and watched. As he approached the man on the floor, he bent down, touched him, and then jerked back, sitting down on a seat nearby. Then he gestured for me to come over. I cautiously approached. "It's Sergei," Uncle Zora said mournfully. "He's dead." He leaned over and pulled a piece of paper from Sergei's hand. It was a note from Lyoka. "I still don't understand what happened," Lyoka wrote in the note. "Sergei said he needed to, relieve himself and stayed in the vestibule, while I went to the next car. I waited for him for about 10 minutes, then went back for him. But he wasn't there. I went back 3 more cars. Nothing. I thought he'd decided to return to you and didn't look for him anymore. I moved forward, searching for the portal, and after 14 cars, I found him on the floor dead. No signs of violence. But how did he end up ahead of me? Almost 10 cars ahead. Uncle Zora, be careful. Damn, what do we do with the body? There's nowhere to bury him. And leaving him here seems wrong. Maybe we should cremate him? Cremation is like a funeral, right?" I suggested. "And let the whole car burn to hell. What do we have to lose?" "No way. Don't even think about setting anything on fire." Uncle Zora panicked. "We already tried burning a car once. We thought we'd set it on fire right in front of the conductor, and if he'd burned up, we'd get back to our world. But it didn't work. As soon as we started the fire, a fireman appeared. He just materialized in the vestibule from the direction of the conductor. A monster, I tell you, no less terrifying than the conductor, but with eyes and wearing a helmet. And he had a hook and a fire extinguisher. We nearly lost it when we saw him. He put out the fire with the extinguisher, raised his hook, and charged at us. Roaring like a wounded bull. He kicked open the doors between the cars. I don't know how many cars we ran through. When I finally collapsed, I thought it was the end for me. But he disappeared as suddenly as he'd appeared. So, I don't recommend playing with fire here. Yeah, I can see there's not much room for fun here, I said, impressed by the story. Whose bag is that? I pointed to a dark backpack under one of the seats. I don't know, let's take a look, Uncle Zora suggested. I set the backpack on the seat, unzipped it, and we started examining its contents. Inside were several boiled eggs, some sliced smoked sausage, a bit of bread, a couple of apples, and a thermos of hot tea. In the inner pocket, we found some money, about 2,000 rubles, some receipts, keys, and a ticket for this train. And then, seeing the ticket, I had an idea. Uncle Zora, the conductor demands a ticket. What if we try to show him this one? We'd end up on the other side of the conductor, and could get back to our world. Well, first of all, we only have one ticket, Uncle Zora reasoned. And second, it's dangerous. What if the conductor doesn't like it? He'll eat us without asking our names. We should experiment with the ticket first, but from a safe distance. And we both looked at Sergei's body. When the conductor finds him on the floor without a ticket, he'll eat him anyway, and we can't hide him. Let's sit Sergei on the seat and put the ticket in his hand, then watch what the conductor does, Uncle Zora suggested. I nodded silently. So we did. Sergei looked like a sleeping passenger. We sat him by the window, facing the rear of the train, right by the entrance to the car. We placed the ticket from the backpack in his right hand. Uncle Zora and I stepped back to the front of the car and waited for the conductor, passing the time with conversation. Uncle Zora, why was all the food in the backpack fresh, and even the tea in the thermos was hot? I asked. That's how it always is on this train. All the luggage we find looks like it was just left behind by some absent-minded passenger," he replied. "Damn. I feel like some kind of lab rat being experimented on and fed so I don't starve," I lamented. "I'd love to know who this evil genius is who's tormenting us like this." "There's no genius," Uncle Zora said. "Humans know so little about the world they live in. And as for the laws of neighboring worlds, we have to adapt," he continued. "We need to try to understand what's happening here. Get a sense of the rules of the game, so to speak. And then maybe we'll find a way out." After some time, we heard the sound of doors slamming between the cars and realized the conductor had reached our car. Being in the same car with him was extremely unpleasant and scary. So, Uncle Zora and I stepped into the vestibule and watched through the glass of the closed doors. It felt safer that way. We saw the conductor muttering some nonsense as he squeezed into the car and began meticulously feeling around. He ran his massive hand over the seat where Sergei's body was sitting and found his hand with the ticket. He carefully took the ticket, then pulled some device from his bag and inserted the ticket into it. A red light lit up on the device, and a long, unpleasant sound rang out. The conductor became agitated, grabbed Sergei's body, and in one swift motion bit off his head. I vomited right onto the glass we were watching through. Uncle Zora grabbed my arm and started pulling me away from the conductor. The experiment had failed. The conductor's device didn't recognize tickets from our world. We were overcome with despair mixed with disappointment. And on top of that, fear drove us to get as far away from the conductor as possible. At first, we moved quickly. We didn't count the cars. But eventually, fatigue set in, and we took a break. The cars varied. Some were old, dirty, and rusty. They smelled bad, and we didn't want to stay in them. Others looked relatively new and clean. We settled in one of those. "Let's have some tea, Valera," Uncle Zora wheezed, pulling the thermos we'd found in the backpack and a couple of candies from his bag. The thermos lid doubled as a cup, and there was a plastic bowl inside. So, the thermos was designed for 2 people. I drank from the lid cup, and Uncle Zora used the bowl. "Uncle Zora, you mentioned some law enforcement. What's that about, local police?" "Yeah, something like that," he said, sipping his tea. "I haven't seen them myself, but Lyoka told me about them. He's been here longer than me." So, there were 3 passengers, Lyoka, Sergei, and Stasik, a semi-homeless guy. Stasik had been here long before Lyoka and Sergei. He said he liked it here. In our world he had no home, but here there's free food and a roof over his head. He even managed to brew alcohol from the fruits and candies he found in the bags. One day, they found a note. It said that you could call for law enforcement in a car by pressing the call button and shouting, "We have an emergency in the car," without paying attention to the noise. But it also said it was better not to do that because 2 officers would appear and take the first person they got their hands on, and you'd never see them again. And that resisting was useless. They were incredibly strong and looked terrifying. When Lyoka read the note out loud, Stasik started laughing and showing off. He said it was all nonsense about the officers, that he'd pressed those buttons 100 times and never seen anyone. Stasik was drunk on his homemade brew. He started cursing loudly, saying he didn't give a damn about the cops, that he could take them all on single-handedly. And so on. Then, according to Lyoka, Stasik ran to the button, pressed it, and shouted, "We have an emergency in the car." The speaker screeched and hissed. But Stasik didn't care. He kept shouting at the top of his lungs, "We have an emergency in the car." Lyoka said he and Sergei tried to pull him away from the button. But then something happened that made them freeze in place. 2 figures burst in from the vestibule. One was huge, reaching the ceiling, the other about half his size. Their faces were covered in horrible scars. Both were wearing remnants of uniforms. Blue shirts, torn and stained with brown spots. The big one's hands were so massive that his sleeves had burst. Both were barefoot but wearing badges. They roared like bears. Their eyes were red and furious. They grabbed Stasik and started beating him, knocking out all his teeth, and smashing his face into a bloody pulp. Then they handcuffed him and dragged him away by his legs to where they'd come from. Lyulka said he and Sergei were paralyzed by what they saw. They were too scared to move forward through the cars for a long time afterward. But the conductor was pushing them from behind, so they had to keep going. They never saw Stasik again, and the bloody trail he left ended in the passage between the cars. It was as if all three of them had simply vanished. Serious stuff, I muttered, not knowing what else to say. Then we noticed the train was slowing down. Looks like we're coming to a station, Uncle Zora said, looking out the window. And possibly picking up another passenger. Do passengers only board at certain stations? I asked in surprise. No, he replied. Sometimes the train stops at a station for a long time, as if waiting for its prey. But it doesn't always manage to snatch another poor soul from our world. What if we get off at the station and try to stop the passenger from boarding? I blurted out. You're naive, Valera. You won't see the passenger. Remember, we're in different realities. He's on the station in our world. And we're, well, who knows where. Meanwhile, the train crept up to the station and came to a complete stop. The doors hissed and clanked open. The speakers grunted something unintelligible. The station consisted of a 2-story building with broken, dark windows. The empty, nighttime platform was lit by a couple of dim lamps. In the wall of the building, there was a single unbroken, barred window with a faint glow, as if a candle was burning inside or the electric light had a bad connection. Can I go out and scout around? I asked. Sure. But when you hear the announcement over the speakers, get back on the train immediately. Otherwise, you'll be stuck here forever. What's in the building? I pressed. Better not go in there, Uncle Zora warned. There are creatures in there you don't want to meet. By the way, if you see anyone outside, run back to the train. They usually don't come out here. It's like it's against the rules for them. But if they catch you outside, they'll eat you. Stop scaring me, Uncle Zora. Now I'm too scared to go out. Exactly, he said meaningfully. I never go out myself. Over this strange world hung an eternal frosty night. But I decided to step out of the car because I had a plan. I decided to go to the ticket booth and try to buy a ticket. As I stepped onto the platform, I felt the biting cold. Strangely, there was no snow anywhere. I only just noticed that. Looking around, I saw forests stretching into the darkness on both sides, and the train cars. Is it really endless? I thought, slowly making my way to the ticket booth. The ticket window was foggy, but behind the dusty glass, I could see the silhouette of the ticket seller. I couldn't make out the details of the figure inside, and I didn't really want to. In the lower part of the window, I saw a rusty tray pushed out toward me. I placed a 500-ruble note in it, slid it back into the booth, and said, 2 tickets, holding up 2 fingers in case the ticket seller couldn't hear me well. The silhouette inside stirred, and suddenly the tray with the money was shoved back out, accompanied by an unintelligible roar and some cursing. I jumped back in surprise. My heart was pounding. I glanced at the building's doorway. The thought of one of its inhabitants hearing the noise and coming out onto the platform made me uneasy. But nothing happened. Carefully retrieving my money from the tray, I turned my head toward the train. And I saw some movement. Moving closer, I made out the outline of a figure, or rather, just its backside. A large man in a dirty orange vest was crouched under the train, fiddling with something. A hammer and some other tools lay on the platform beside him. Under the train, I could hear his dissatisfied grumbling and the clinking of metal, probably fixing some malfunction in the train's undercarriage. Probably the local mechanic. How hasn't he noticed me yet? I thought with horror. I wanted to dive back into the train before the mechanic spotted me. But then I saw a red ID card sticking out of the back pocket of his dirty pants. Probably a railroad worker's ID. Flashed through my mind, and a plan formed. I crept up behind the mechanic, snatched the ID from his pocket, and bolted for the train doors. His reaction was animalistic, and he roared as he chased after me. Losing precious seconds climbing the train's metal steps, I felt the mutant closing in on me just as I reached the vestibule. I slid open the doors to the left car, where Uncle Zora was waiting, and dashed toward the rear of the train. The doors hadn't even closed behind me when I felt the mechanic grab my leg. I fell to the floor, grabbing onto the leg of the first seat. Standing on the platform, the mechanic reached into the car with his impossibly long arms, even though I was already inside. Uncle Zora, his face filled with fear, rushed to help me. He grabbed my clothes and pulled with all his might to get me into the car. The situation was dire. From the rear, the conductor was inexorably approaching, and from the front, the mechanic's hydraulic-like arm was pulling me out. The odds were against us, and Uncle Zora and I knew the mechanic would yank me out of the car like a cork from a bottle. We strained with all our might, Uncle Zora shouting at me to hold on, but my hand was losing its grip, finger by finger. We looked at each other in terror, silently saying our goodbyes. Then I remembered the emergency call button. With an incredible effort, I reached for it, pressed it, and shouted at the top of my lungs. "Emergency in our CAR! Emergency in our car!" And then the real horror began. 2 mutant officers burst into the vestibule, and the first thing they saw was the mechanic, who was halfway into the train, pulling me by the leg. A second later, I heard the crunch of bones breaking and the mechanic's wild scream. A bloody massacre unfolded in the vestibule. The car shook as if a herd of elephants were dancing on the roof. The 2 goblins dragged the mechanic into the vestibule and began tearing him apart. The roaring and screaming were so loud it made my ears ring. Uncle Zora, panting, pulled me into the middle of the car. Turning around, I saw the mechanic's severed hand still gripping my leg, dragging behind me, leaving a bloody trail. The rest of him was flying around the vestibule under the blows of the officers, smashing the windows and the car doors. We stood frozen, watching the scene. Suddenly, the mechanic went silent, and through the broken windows, we saw the 2 officers dragging his remains into the passage between the cars. Exhausted, we sat on the floor of the car. From the speakers came another unintelligible but expressive announcement. The train hissed as the doors closed and continued its endless journey through the vastness of the strange world. "Valera! What the hell did you provoke that mutant for?" Uncle Zora wheezed angrily, catching his breath. I pulled the freshly stolen ID from my pocket and handed it to Uncle Zora. "What do you need it for?" he asked, clutching his chest. "I'll present it at the ticket booth and get us a couple of local tickets so we can get out of this damn train," I panted. "Interesting theory, colleague," he sneered. "But you almost got your head torn off for it. Come on, Uncle Zora. It all worked out. Now, at the next station, I'll get us tickets. I'm already afraid to imagine how that will go," he continued to mock, handing me back the ID. I grinned and opened the ID to examine my trophy. It was as cartoonish as everything else in this bizarre world. The neat lines were a mix of Cyrillic and Latin letters. Uppercase and lowercase letters were randomly placed. It was impossible to read anything, but it all looked official, even the photo of the owner with a large round seal. The wrinkled face in the photo was repulsive. The eyes, one higher than the other, showed a complete lack of intelligence. The lipless mouth grinned with large, yellow horse-like teeth. 2 slits for a nose and huge ears completed the picture. "Uncle Zora, do you think the ticket seller will notice the photo isn't me?" "Don't worry. You 2 look like twins. Same face," he croaked, laughing. After this joke, we couldn't get up from the floor. The adrenaline was leaving our bodies, and we were overcome with nervous laughter. We laughed until we cried, rolling on the floor. When we finally stopped, I tried to free my leg from the mechanic's grip. But it wasn't easy. The dead man's grip was literally unbreakable. His hand had been torn from his shoulder, about 2 meters long and very heavy, hanging from my leg like a weight. Apparently, a spasm had locked his massive fingers in an iron grip, and the dead hand refused to let go. "Cut the tendons," Uncle Zora said, handing me his knife. I took the knife and started cutting the back of the dead hand. The fingers loosened one by one, and I finally freed my leg. In the dim light of the car, the mechanic's huge hand lay on the floor, its fingers twitching like a spider's legs in time with the train's motion. We wanted to leave this car as soon as possible. It felt like the hand might come to life at any moment and grab someone by the throat. "Uncle Zora, let's get out of here," I suggested. "I really don't want to wait for the conductor." He silently picked up his bag, and we carefully stepped around the hand, heading for the vestibule. Opening the doors, we saw a gruesome scene. The vestibule was covered in the mechanic's blood, dripping from the ceiling, running down the walls, and on the floor were scattered teeth, bloody scraps, and a huge eye. The crunch of broken glass under our feet. The walls and doors were dented from the blows. What we saw sent chills down our spines. We were too scared to go further. What if those two were waiting for us in the next vestibule? Uncle Zora stepped into the passage between the cars. The bloody trail ended there. He cracked open the door to the next vestibule. It was empty. The car beyond was also clear. "Valera, we need to go through about 10 or 12 cars so we can eat and rest in peace," Uncle Zora said without stopping. "No problem," I replied, limping. After the mechanic's iron grip, my leg was sore, but I could endure it if it meant getting away from that bloody car and the approaching conductor. After passing 3 cars, we found a large plastic bag and a woman's handbag. The bag contained expensive sausage, cognac, a bottle of cola, fruit, chocolate, and a jar of olives. The pink handbag lay nearby, its label sparkling with rhinestones, 3 Latin letters. NGA inside was a standard ladies' set. Nothing interesting except for a stun gun, which we took with us. Uncle Zora transferred the food to his bag, and we moved on. After 9 more cars, we decided to take a break. We unpacked the food and had a small feast with the cognac. Then exhaustion took over, and we dozed off. I woke up to Uncle Zora shaking my shoulder. "What's wrong, Uncle Zora?" I jumped up. "The train has stopped," he said. "Another station." I looked out the window. In the darkness, an empty platform held a concrete ticket booth and a couple of broken benches under a rusty awning. The whole nighttime scene was lit by a dying lamp on a pole. The ticket booth's window glowed faintly, as if a candle was burning inside or the electric light had a bad connection. I stepped onto the platform and breathed in the frosty air. Uncle Zora stood in the vestibule, watching me. "Uncle Zora, why is there no snow here?" I asked softly from the platform. "It's winter, after all." "I don't know," he replied. "In all the time I've been here, I've never seen snow." Looking around, I slowly approached the ticket booth.